Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and today I'm going to be speaking about leadership and culture. And I'm excited about this because it's been a passion of mine now for a very long time. And I started because when I'm looking at any kind of transformation because of technology or competitive or environmental, again, you can put the best strategy together. But if your leadership and culture is not aligned, with that strategy, if it's not integrated with that strategy, then your strategy is not going to work. So I always like to say that you can have the best strategy in the world, but if your culture isn't strong, then it's not going to work. But you could have a great culture, then anything that you throw against it in terms of strategy, it will succeed. And especially in a fast moving space like generative AI, your culture needs to be extremely strong, and leadership is the foundation of that. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So I do have a couple slides, and also I would encourage you to come and share where you're coming from today. And also, this is where the slides are going to be at bit.ly slash C. It's kind of long because I keep talking about this topic, CLI dash leadership dash culture. So again, I see Jay is here. Thank you very much, Jay. I wasn't able to get you the link, but if you could share that, and I'll just put that again in there too as well. So a couple things that I do want to say. Let me just put this into the chat too as well. So a couple things I would like you to all do too as well, and that is to share how AI is changing how leadership and culture is happening in your organization. How has it changed? How have you had to change as a leader? So we'll be talking about that quite a bit here today. So let me just get into my slides and we'll get started. So there are a couple challenges that I see organizations facing when it comes to leadership in generative AI. First of all, it is really complex. Things are constantly changing, things are very uncertain, the technology keeps changing, and it's also really complex for the organization because it goes across the organization. It tends to impact multiple organizations or multiple silos that are typically not used to working with each other. We have resistance to change because people like doing things the way that they've done before. And in my study of disruption, I have found that the reason people feel disrupted, the feeling of disruption, and the reason they don't like it is because they're torn from where they were comfortable and they don't know where they're going to and they haven't arrived there yet. So the state of disruption of not knowing is very uncomfortable. So understandably, there's a resistance to change. So it's important for leaders to provide that sort of container and that space for all of that change to happen. Trust is really hard to develop. Again, there's low trust in organizations today. And we also know that people have been trained and heard over and over again, you can't trust AI. It makes up things, it hallucinates. And then finally, it also requires that we shift our leadership styles. And this one I really want to touch on a little bit because we as leaders have been taught and have seen models of leadership that are not well suited to fast changing, complex, constantly evolving environments. We tend to be taught to do command and control, where a new type of leadership is very much needed, especially if you want to be successful in a space like generative AI. So I think a couple of things here that we want to look at today is how we're going to go through and think about this. And one thing in particular I want to just share is that when we think about traditional organizations, we think of them as, again, having this hierarchy. And hierarchies are really important. They help us develop and understand how information is going to flow down through an organization. And they're very good. I'm sorry, decisions are going to flow down and how information flows up. So as organizations get bigger and bigger, they inevitably develop hierarchies. And they work really well when things are fairly static. But the reality is the way work gets done today, it looks something more like this. So it is much more complex. People are going across hierarchies and organizations. So this is why more complex matrix organizations come up, flat organizations. And we constantly are trying to figure out how do we do this. Now, one thing that has changed significantly over the past few decades, in particular last decade, is that information now does not have to go up a silo because we have so many, such better collaboration and communication tools. So we can get access to information without having to invest in hierarchies. Similarly, decisions can be spread out, and again, integration and matching of objectives can be done throughout an organization without those hierarchies as much. Again, things are shifting constantly, and I don't feel that leadership and organizations have really caught up to this new way of working. So I do think that thinking about all of this in the context of generative AI is really important, because with generative AI, we have a completely different phenomenon happening. And that is, we now have superhumans. And what I mean by that is, we have these superhumans who are able to do so much more than we could have ever imagined. And because they can do so much more, they need to be led, need to be managed, need to be developed in a very different way, I believe. And so I like to say that when we have superhuman employees, we need to also have superhuman leaders. So what does that look like? What does it feel like? Well, a couple things. Leaderships, there's a lot of fear going on with AI. And if we want our employees to have these superhuman powers, then our number one job as leaders right now is to overcome fear. And in particular, we think that AI is oftentimes this sort of instant AI. Plug it, play it, you can just immediately use it. And the reality is, it's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to be very big systemic changes, transformational changes that require leaders to, again, help people move from the space of before to this new space of after, and to hold that space and container for them to be able to leave that safety of where they were before, move into a place of experimentation and not knowing, and to keep them from falling into that world of feeling highly disrupted and stressed, to feeling, oh, change this, I can manage this change. And instead of being stressed, they're feeling stretched. So that is the challenge, I think. And we, in particular, leaders need to acknowledge that there is a fear of job loss, there is a fear of failure. Because what happens if I don't do well with this? Am I going to lose my job? But if I do it, I'm going to lose my job because I'll be replaced by the AI. So, again, I think it's very difficult for people to manage all of this. And the best thing that leaders can do is to model this way of thinking and of being, of having a growth mindset by modeling themselves how vulnerable they can be, how much they are leaning into this growth and learning process too, as well. So I can't tell you how important it is for leaders to show up and say, yeah, I don't know how to use this, and I'm learning, and I'm trying things, and I'm experimenting, and I'm failing. One of my favorite examples of this right now is Jamie Dimon, who is the CEO of JP Morgan. Again, he is a total technology optimist. He's been at the front edge and pushing the organization to use technology for decades. And his embrace of generative AI has been amazing. He talks about it very fluidly. He wants to use it. He was just recently quoted in an article to saying, come on, get these tools on my phone because I want to use them on my phone on the go. And so these are things that I think are very much exemplified by the top leadership. And you can't expect your organization to do something if you're not doing it yourself. So, a couple other points I want to make is that this requires a new way of being a leader. And so it really emphasizes the fact that you're going to be coaching people into learning this, because frankly, you don't know all the answers yourself. So it's a focus on coaching people into AI rather than commanding that they go into AI. And for those leaders who feel that, again, it's a command and control approach to leadership, have to shift that mindset to thinking about how do I coach people into the adoption of AI. And another key technique and skill for leaders is that you need to encourage this fast moving AI aspect of the organization, encourage people to try, experiment, and move fast, but also realize that the broader organizational goals mean that you can't move too fast, that you need to do this safely. So, this nuance of these two things held in the same place, seeing them as two sides of the coin of having change happening and also having order happening. The two together lead to success. And that's a very hard place for leaders to go sit into. I remember working with one leader at an organization that was going through a huge culture transformation, going, I have been told my entire life to make sure things don't go wrong. Because when things go wrong, and this leader was in a manufacturing environment, when things go wrong, people die. And now you're telling me to go fast and break things. How do I hold those two things in the same place? So that kind of leadership wisdom, I think, is very important to have. And we'll talk more about this, the importance of fostering trust and psychological safety. Now, one of the things that I strongly believe is that when we think about leadership, it is all about credibility and the trust in that leadership. So I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about what that looks like. And one of the most important things that you can do as a leader is to make sure that you move from having all of the answers. And again, you're not going to have all of the answers when it comes to generative AI, especially. So, what's going to happen? How are we going to develop? What's it going to look like? Admitting that you don't have the answers is the first step towards building trust. And instead, get really good, really practice how to ask great questions that steer your organization and your teams in the right direction of where you want to move with your strategy. This is a really important technique that I've seen these amazing leaders come in and say, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell us what are the questions we need to address and to limit, again, and focus what everyone is going to be working on. So let's see. We're gonna go. I'm just gonna go on. I see a couple comments coming, but I'm just gonna keep going on for a little bit. So this whole idea of integrating strategy, culture, and leadership is absolutely key. So culture again starts at the top, and we know that culture is going to have to shift, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. And then integrating these AI initiatives to make sure again that they have that impact, and then again transparency, championing transparency, trust, and fairness and accountability in AI use. So let me go into how that looks. This in particular is something some of you may have seen before, and it's a hierarchy of trust that my co-author, Katja Welsh, and I have been developing for our book. And the idea is that you start at different levels of the trust pyramid. So having safety, security, and privacy, that you can use it without jeopardizing uh, sensitive data inside the organization is absolutely key. Then ensuring that there's fairness, that any bias is removed from your use of AI, that quality and accuracy are there, that there is accountability when things go wrong, that somebody's going to be responsible, and that transparency is always there about how you're using AI to make decisions. And the thing that we have found is that hands-on training across the board of an entire organization on how to use AI, what it is, how it can be used, what its capabilities are, what its limitations are. It is absolutely essential to demystify AI and also to build people's confidence in using it. I can't tell you how many times I go around and speak and I ask people, are you using AI? And some hands go up, maybe about 20 to 30% of the hands go up that they use it confidently on a regular basis. And everyone else is going, I don't want to go near it because I just don't know how to use it. I feel insecure. I'm afraid it's going to do something. I don't want to fail. So there's no replacement to doing things and using it hands on. And then the other thing that happens is that transparency is so important because when you can be clear about what it can do, how you're using it, when it's working, and just as importantly, what it's not good for, when not to use it, when is it not producing the results that you want. Transparency is also about how you're using it, but also what works and doesn't work for your organization. So having that transparency, again, demystifies it, shifts AI from being this threat. Like, what's going on with it? I don't know what's going on. What are we doing as an organization? Are we using AI to replace all our workers? Having transparency about the strategy, how the technology is being used, what your plans are for the future is absolutely essential for building trust. So, the reason why I'm focusing on trust so much is that it is the number one reason why organizations are going slow. And so, everything that you can do with your leadership and your culture to build trust in each other, in the technology and in the leadership and the strategy is absolutely essential. So I do want to take a quick look at some of the questions and comments that are here. Jay has a great point here. As change champions, we have to be thinking about a different way that's not hierarchical because it's just limiting. Moral leadership is key. I love this point. Trust and dignity are key enablers, and we'll talk about dignity in just a second. Lynn has this great point. We frame efficiency as empowering for reassignment to new growth generation, expanding products, capabilities. Is always constrained at the level of inefficiency. So great, great observation there. Seems lately we're too quick to think only of efficiency equals fewer jobs. Turn it around to embrace change. Lynn, you make a really good point here in that it's not again, we think of AI as a productivity tool, as a way to become more efficient. And if we only focus on that in our communication and our excitement about AI, people are going to be looking to the right, to the left, and saying, oh, that means my job. More efficiency, more productivity means my job. I won't have a job in the future, so you won't need me. Versus if you say AI is going to help us create competitive advantage, differentiation. It's going to allow us to do all these things for our customers we couldn't do before, and we want you to be a part of this. And yes, efficiency is going to be happening along the way, but that's not the primary reason we're doing this. So it's one of the biggest things that I think is really important in aligning strategy, leadership, and culture. All right, let me just go back a couple more things, and I'm watching the time here too as well. So a couple ways to build trust. First of all, I think it's really important to trust our employees and trust these superhuman employees that they are going to do the right thing. So I'll talk a bit in a second about how to create that space and that container for them to experiment in a safe way. Again, there's something that I've seen called collaboration intelligence, and that is knowing how to connect your human experts with the AI tools and building that collaboration together to build that confidence in how that collaboration is going to take place. Again, I do think it's a form of intelligence that needs to be developed and fostered and again promoted inside an organization. And then finally, using failure as a learning tool and providing air cover for that. So I do want to talk about culture and failure and all these things together as a package. So in my work around transformation, one of the things I look at is how culture is developed and maintained and changed and evolved. And culture is simply made up of beliefs and behaviors. If it's about what you believe in and how you actually act on those beliefs. So you can change culture by changing the beliefs that would then impact behaviors. And it can also change by new behaviors just evolving, and those lead to new beliefs that, again, those behaviors are centered on. So you can change culture by changing your beliefs and behaviors. And I just want to show you just some of the research I had done in my previous book, The Disruption Mindset, about what are the three common beliefs of really disruptive transformational organizations. These are organizations that are constantly changing, constantly transforming themselves, and they seem to go from one disruption and transformation to another without really skipping a beat. Believe me, it is hard for them as well, but they have less stress. They have more stretch in their cultures because they have openness. Again, that transparency I was talking about before. There's a strong sense of agency that each employee, each member of the organization has the agency, the ability to think and act like an owner. So this sense of empowerment that is inherent in their participation in the organization is there. And then third is they have a strong bias for action. And instead of having to have all the information available so they can make the decision, They get the minimum amount of information to make the decision and can keep moving forward. So, what I find is that this is very similar inside of organizations. And if you think about superhuman employees in particular, these are employees who need to have their agency developed. Again, these are employees who will oftentimes were at the front lines, were told to do a job in a certain way, and then you give them these tools. They suddenly develop these superhuman powers. They're not going to want to do things in a prescribed certain way. If anything, they want to explore, they want to go in and try new things, stretch their new powers to see where they could go. And so it's really important to allow them to do that. And yet at the same time, if they've never done that before, they will feel very uncomfortable. They'll be looking around and saying, do I have permission to go and do this? So it's just as important to think about what that relationship with failure is going to be. They're afraid that if they go and extend themselves and it doesn't work out, how will they be able to be successful if they're failing? One organization realized they had a big problem with this. And so they tried everything to embrace failure, celebrate failure, fail fast, fail smart. Nothing seemed to work. And so they decided that they would never fail again. And they did this by saying, by addressing the core feeling and emotion of shame around failure. And by removing that, they said, look, you feel bad about this. Why do you feel bad? Yes, we didn't meet the goal, but look at how much we have learned. Look at how much we've come. We started over there, we're here, and now we know how much further we can go. How can that be seen as a failure? So, by looking at every achievement, every movement forward as a success, as something that is good, it removes that stigma of failure and says instead, we're learning from every single adventure going forward. And so, this is a very different growth mindset that's needed. And one of the best ways to do this for people who have not experienced this before in the past is to define the edges of where they can explore. Think of a game of tennis or any game without any boundaries. It's not a very interesting game. You don't know what is safe. By defining the edges of what is possible, you create that focus, you create instant creativity to work inside of that container, and you also increase speed because you know that anything inside of that container is going to be fine. So in many ways, you may be opening things up for people to try with AI, to do things with AI, but the constraints that you put on it are just as important. It's one of the reasons why I believe in really strong governance, that governance and guidelines and guardrails are essential for moving fast. So, good governance speeds things up, it doesn't slow things down. And I have some previous live streams and content that talks about governance. I think it was just last month. So, you can go and take a look at that. So, one thing that you can do is to go and do an exercise, which I call value alignment. So, identify one process that AI could improve, whatever it is, just pick one, and then discuss how you would put trust building measures, things that would build trust, and integrate that into the adoption of AI. So, as you're thinking about AI coming in and changing that process, how will you build trust into that integration and adoption process? So, we're going to be talking more about this next week about how processes change. But I also want you to think more holistically. But as you are adopting AI, looking at these use cases, how will we build in a culture of trust, a culture of safety? How will we have to show up as leaders to create that container so that people feel safe and overcome those fears that they have? So I do believe again that trust is the cornerstone of successful AI adoption, and that the three things to really develop that trust as a leader and in your culture is to prioritize that hands-on training, adjust these behaviors and beliefs in your culture to support AI. If you find that there are some beliefs that are no longer serving you, the way that you've thought about things, I'll share one very common belief I hear. I don't have permission. I don't have permission to try, to ask, to experiment. I have to stay within my swim lane, keep my head down, focus on what I do. That is a belief that will not serve you in a world that generative AI is in. And so, how will you um, identify that beliefs like that, the behaviors that show up with that, and replace them with new beliefs that will move your organization forward instead? And then finally, maximize transparency. Again, people tend to be very secretive about things. To the extent possible, maximize all the things you share. Now, there are some things early on where you don't know what your strategy is, but even just sharing the fact we are pulling together a strategy, and here are the broad outlines. It is not to cut jobs. It is to create competitive advantage. We'll be back with you in a few weeks with that full strategy. But even just to say that, that level of transparency, to give people a timeline, to let them know something is being worked on and the general direction of it will help relieve that stress. So that's what I have for today. I'm going to go and see what other questions and comments people may have. And again, these are where the slides are at. And I just want to check and see what else we have here. Let's see. Christopher is sharing this. One of the most challenging tasks I've been facing with culture and change is to keep the momentum and keep it sustainable. And Christopher, I'd love to hear a little bit more, maybe in the comments. Hopefully, we have some time for you to respond. But I'm curious, what is dragging it down? Because if the culture is strong enough, you're getting people to become leaders themselves, and they take on the mantle of change so that it isn't just you and the top leaders creating that change in that transformation. It's other people getting really excited about this. And so in the disruption mindset, I talk about how creating movements is a really key part of being a leader too as well. I didn't have time to go into that today, but I do believe that being a leader and creating this change to sustain it requires that you create movements. And I can't think of a single leadership course and business school that teaches leaders how to create movements. And movements are all about letting go. It's about setting the course, creating a vision. And if you think about what leadership is, it's fundamentally a relationship between a person who wants to create change, who aspires to create change, and the people who are inspired to follow that person. So that's all leadership is. It's just that relationship between people who aspire to create change and people who are inspired to create that change. And when you can inspire people to create that change, then they will become part of that momentum in that change instead of slogging and flogging people along, like, come on, let's go change. It becomes, it takes on this sense of a movement. So finding your super users, finding them, allowing them to step into this void of leadership and allowing them to take on more of that leadership role and sustaining the momentum is going to be really helpful, I think. All right, that's a great question, Christopher. So thank you so much for doing that. Um, uh, Jay has this one point that empowerment can be perceived as synonymous with chaos by existing leadership. Yes, very true. Which is why those guardrails, those constraints, are so important. And I find that again when you and again, I really draw a distinction between agency and empowerment. Empowerment is when people feel that they are empowered, but they're waiting for somebody over there to give them the power. When I was running Altimeter, we had one of our values be empowerment. And it just drove me crazy that people kept coming up to me and saying, hey, can I do this? And I point to our values and say, it says empowered, you're empowered to do that. Yeah, but I really want to check still. So I think that agency has a different approach and a different tone to it. And it's saying that instead of thinking about, I have to get permission to be empowered, I've always had the power. I've always had the agency to think as an individual, to think as a leader, to think about, consider all the different areas of change. And the way to keep that from being chaotic is to have everybody really clear. This is where we're going with our strategy and everyone being really clear, this is how I am contributing to that strategy and communicating to each other. This is how collectively we are creating and executing on our strategy and achieving common objectives. So that integration, that matching, that coordination is so crucial to agency being there. and it takes a lot more work. I wrote in my book, Open Leadership, about how being open is a lot harder than being closed and in control. Because when you're in control, it's very clear to everybody, only do these things. But if you open it up just even a little bit, you have to do a lot more work to define what can you do? How open can we be? What will we allow? And so this is why leadership has to change and really needs to be thought of in a very different way, especially because of all of this. Greg has this one comment: experienced a lot of resistance from leaders who want to learn more about AI and bring their teams together to co-create a thoughtful strategy. Is this common or is it just my approach? It's not you, Greg. It's just reassure you, it is not you. What happens is that again, I think there's a lack of knowledge, frankly, about what AI does. And again, that knowledge and people understanding AI at a fundamental level. And then also the other part of it is a lot of leaders don't understand strategy and they only look at it from their siloed perspective of what strategy is. So being able to align on what strategy is using things like strategy cascade from Roger Martin, and again, aspirations, where we're going to play, how we're going to win, what our capabilities are, and our systems for measuring that. That is what strategy is. It's not planning. So being clear about what strategy is and isn't, and then also having a base level of AI and making sure everyone at that strategy table in a smaller group as you can manage, a minimally viable team is what I highly recommend. Then you break down that resistance. And the resistance, frankly, I think comes from, again, the sense that it's optional, and I think the sooner we make it clear to our leaders, AI is not optional. It is right here on our doorsteps, and we have to deal with it. And would be truly unwise for them to ignore it and put it off because they're uncomfortable. So do everything possible to get them to feel comfortable. I do a lot of workshops with top senior leaders and boards to make AI accessible to them. And literally, light bulbs are going off left and right when they see how you can use it effectively, how they make it personal for them and how it impacts their work. Literally, it's a night and day conversation with them before and after those. So get their hands into it, give them the tools. Again, I think one of the ways to get leaders to think strategically about AI is to have them see it. All right, so I think that's all I have time for. Let's see. I am going to be Oh, wrong date. I just realized. Hold on for a second. So join me next week on, I think it's the 10th. So I'm just going to change this real quick so that it shows up correctly. And here we go. All right. So join me next week on Tuesday, the 10th at 9 a.m. We're going to be discussing how processes are changing. And so processes change left and right. We are obviously the way that you do work with generative AI is going to change the way you work. You have to change your processes. But there is a definite way to think about how to do this in a systematic way that's not going to be highly disruptive. And so we'll talk about how to think about processes because it's fundamental to the success of a AI rollout inside your organization. So until then, take care, stay safe out there, and please, again, as always, stay in touch. Share with me your successes, your challenges. I always love to hear from you. All right, take care. Thank you so much for joining today. Bye bye.